Ice. Stories and Pictures by Robert Lawson. All through the night it snowed heavily. In the morning, Uncle and Aldous, always the first up, went to the burrow entrance, butted and kicked his way out through the now deep snow, came back, shook himself well, and climbed into bed again. "A good foot now," he said gloomily, pulling the blankets up around his chin. "And still a-comin'." In a few minutes he was snoring peacefully. About noon there was a slight difference in the sound of the softly falling snow, and Father went out to observe. "Rain," he reported. "A freezing rain. There is a considerable crust on the snow. I had some difficulty in breaking out." Little Georgie had slept as much as he could, and he was becoming extremely bored, when, late in the afternoon, they were all roused by a sudden commotion at the burrow entrance. In burst Willie Fieldmouse, followed by 3 of his young cousins. The young cousins, fairly well blown by their tunneling efforts, at once settled themselves by the fireplace. Willie, however, was bursting with excitement. "Oh, George!" he cried. "The old cat is lost! Mr. Muldoon, you know. The folks were calling him all night, and the man has been tramping around the fields all day in this freezing rain, and he can't find him. But I know where he is. I found him, but I can't do anything about it." "You are somewhat overexcited, William," Father said, "and your account lacks coherence. You say that the cat is lost, but you found him. Therefore he cannot be lost. Now suppose you sit down and tell us quietly just what has happened." "Yes, sir, I'll try," Willie answered. "Well, we were digging a tunnel to Uncle Sleeper's. He lives down along the wall there, and Mother wanted to be sure he was all right. And suddenly we came on the old cat holed up under the snow, right beside the wall. He must have gotten lost, and when the snow got too deep, he'd just got in a little hole there by the wall, and let it snow over him, and kept turning around until he had a nice little room, all hollowed out. And now he can't get out, because there's an awful thick crust on the top of the snow." "The poor old thing," Mother said. "Isn't he terribly cold, Willie?" "No, ma'am, I don't think so," replied Willie. "Of course I didn't feel him, but it's nice and warm there under the snow. He must be getting real hungry, though. That's why we didn't stay around very long." "The poor folks!" Mother exclaimed. "And them getting ready to go away and all, and the cat lost, and them so fond of him. It does seem to me there ought to be something we could do. And him so nice to all of us and never harmed a soul. Oh, Aunt Aldous, isn't there something you and Father and Georgie could do?" "Not me," Uncle and Aldous answered promptly. "It's agin nature, that's what it is. Since when we have mice and rabbits taken to helping out cats. Maybe he ain't ever done nothing to any of us, but he ain't ever done nothing for any of us neither. No, sir, I ain't one to fly in the face of nature." He pulled up the blankets and went to sleep again. "Foxy had a lovely turkey carcass last night," little Georgie said thoughtfully. "There was a lot of nice meat on it. If we could only get some of that to Mr. Muldoon, he'd at least have something to eat. But I guess we can't. Foxy's iced in just like the rest of us." "I think maybe we can. I know we can," squeaked Willie Fieldmouse excitedly. He sat quiet for a time, and they could see him going over in his mind all the maze of mouse tunnels that covered the hill. "Look," he finally said, "there's a tunnel from here to our place, and there's one that goes up through the rock garden to Aunt Minnie's. Father dug that one this morning. Then from there's a long one up to Uncle Stackpole's, way up near the pine wood. I'm sure that's dug by now. Foxy's den is right close to that one. I know exactly where. It'll only take us a little while to dig it into him. Then, if he'll let us have a little turkey meat, we can drag it down and give it to Mr. Muldoon." "I wonder if he will," little Georgie said doubtfully. "Foxy doesn't know Mr. Muldoon very well, and I don't think he cares especially about him one way or the other." "You will have to be most diplomatic and persuasive, William," Father instructed. "Be very polite and use all the powers of eloquence at your command. You might mention that compliance with your request would bring deep pleasure to Mother and me." "Yes, sir," replied Willie. "Come on, boys." The 3 young cousins rose from the fireplace somewhat reluctantly, shook themselves, and scampered down the tunnel. "It may take some time," Willie called back, "but we'll do our best." Mother, Father, and little Georgie sat through the long evening in silence, their mind filled with thoughts of the old cat, trapped in his tiny refuge under the icy crust. Mother's thoughts turned mostly to the folks in their distress. Uncle and Aldous snored. The freezing rain seemed to have stopped, but the wind had risen. Every now and then they could hear the jar and crash of some great ice-coated tree branch falling to the earth. Although outside sounds were muffled, they could recognize the roar and clatter of trucks plowing the black road, and could sometimes hear the shouts of linemen battling to repair falling wires. Finally, little Georgie dozed off. He was awakened by a cry from Mother and the excited chittering of Field Mouse. There stood Willie and his 3 cousins, each dragging a long sliver of plump white turkey meat. They were thoroughly exhausted, and Mother insisted that they take a short rest before finishing their journey. "Well, William," Father congratulated him, "I am delighted to see your good manners and eloquence prevailed on Foxy. I trust that the mention of my name was also of some assistance." "He was asleep," Willie said, grinning, "so we didn't have to be eloquent. We had to be awful quiet, though. That's why it took so long." They resumed their burdens and set off towards Mr. Muldoon's refuge. They were soon back. "He just loved it," Willie reported. "He gobbled up every piece as fast as we could push it in. But we didn't stay around long. He might still have been a little hungry." Next morning, Georgie was waked by the voices of Father and Uncle and Aldous. Evidently, they had been up some time, for they had clawed an opening through the snow as far as the icy top crust. There they were stopped. All their pushing and grunting, thumping and kicking were to no avail. "Maybe the sun will soften the ding-blasted ice," Uncle and Aldous growled. Now, who was about to get a tough winter, and it had hardly begun yet, and he went back to bed. Little Georgie went out and stared up at the ice sheet that imprisoned them. It looked like frosted glass, with the sun glimmering through it. Apparently the wind was blowing strongly, for he could hear twigs and branches sliding and skittering over the surface. He wished he could tunnel under the snow as skillfully as Willie Field Mouse, and tried it, but he didn't get very far. Then he had breakfast and waited for Uncle and Aldous to wake up. When he did, an hour or 2 later, they went out to try again, as Father and Uncle and Aldous pushed and grunted. The crust did seem to be giving slightly. Little Georgie clambered up on their shoulders and heaved and pushed as hard as he could. With a great crackling, the ice suddenly gave way, and little Georgie was shot out into the blinding sunlight. He was speechless with surprise at the way the look of things had changed. Fallen branches, large and small, lay everywhere. Shrubs were flattened. Slender saplings were bent over like croquet wickets. The tall cedars were splayed out like worn-out brushes, and every twig, every boulder, even the red brick house was sheathed in a winking, glittering ice. The wind was bitterly cold, but the sun had begun to loosen the ice, which was now falling from the trees in tinkling showers. He could see the man and Tim McGrath attacking the fallen boughs with saws and axes, carefully searching under each one. Uncle and Aldous shook the snow out of his ears and went off to see if any of the other animals had managed to break out. Father and little Georgie hastened along the wall to the spot beyond the little oak tree where Willie Field Mouse had said Mr. Muldoon was buried. They found the place easily, but though they rapped and scratched, no sound came from below the ice. Mr. Muldoon's plight seemed pretty hopeless. Suddenly, little Georgie had an idea, and without warning a word to Father, he dashed off up the hill. It was rather tough going, for the icy crust was terribly slippery and the wind was strong. He had a great many slips and tumbles before reaching the shelter of the pine wood. Here the ice had hardly penetrated. The snow was still soft and fluffy. He floundered and hopped through it until he saw the warm brown form of Red Buck. The buck had tramped down the snow in a neat circular yard and was quietly browsing on the hemlock twigs. "Good morning to you, sir, and good luck to you," little Georgie said politely. "Good morning, Georgie," replied the buck. "And how have you little fellows fared in the storm?" "Not very well, sir," Georgie answered. "Most everyone's still iced in, and poor Mr. Muldoon." He plunged into an account of Mr. Muldoon's plight, ending with a plea for the buck's assistance. "Well, I don't know," the buck answered dubiously. "Hate to walk in an ice crust. Cut your ankles real nasty. Snow covers up holes, and mole runs and stones can break a leg as easily as not. I've never had much to do with that cat. Ordinarily, I wouldn't bother with him. Still and all, we do owe the folks an awful lot, and I suppose I ought to do what I can to help out. Come on, we'll try it anyway." Going down the hill, the buck walked with extreme care, thrusting each hoof gingerly through the ice crust, feeling his footing and withdrawing his hoofs very gently. Little Georgie, in high spirits, galloped in circles, slithered and skittered, and took a long breath-taking coast on the slippery surface. Tim McGrath and the man stopped their labors to watch quietly as the two animals had passed. Father had been scratching and thumping at the ice, but had made no impression at all, and although he had heard Mr. Muldoon mew once or twice. Now the buck, rapping at the crust with his chisel-sharp hoof, broke it up and began carefully pawing away the slabs of ice. As he worked closer and closer to the spot where Father thought the mewing had come from, little Georgie's breath grew short with excitement. Finally, with a gentle heave, the buck pried up one last long slab, revealing Mr. Muldoon, neatly curled in a snowy nest. The old cat rose, somewhat stiffly, shook himself irritably, and without so much as a glance at his rescuers, stalked away up the hill, his dignified pace interrupted now and then by an awkward sprawl on the icy surface. Father immediately hastened back to the burrow to relieve Mother's mind. The man gathered the cat in his arms and went up to the house, but Tim McGrath continued to stare in open-mouthed wonder. He watched while the deer and little Georgie, running gay circles around him, carefully retraced his steps up the hill. The buck's antlers were cut and scraped by the crust, and an occasional drop of blood marked his trail. Tim walked down the wall, examined the old cat's refuge and the deer's footprints, and the pawed-away slabs of ice. "Holy saints," he murmured. "If I hadn't seen it with me own 2 eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. I'm not sure I do now." He went up to the tool house, gathered a huge armful of hay, and lugged it all the way up the hill to the edge of pine wood, where he spread it out beside the deer's trail. "Feed in the wild stock," he laughed at himself a bit sheepishly. "I must be getting soft in the head. Next thing, I'll be taken to reading books." Taken from The Tough Winter.